Good afternoon. Firstly, on behalf of the NDP caucus and in particular my colleague Nicholas Simons from Powell River Sunshine Coast, I want to express our condolences and thoughts with the family of Harold Long today, who passed away yesterday in a plane crash. It's a tragic loss, I know, for the family, for his community, and for British Columbia. And we wish his family all the best in what must be a terrible time for him and for all those who knew him. Thanks for joining me today. Shortly before the election we just had, I met a hearing-impaired young man. He stopped me and asked to write me a note in my notebook. And he asked, "Are you going to win?" And I answered, as I often do, "If we work hard, we can win." He wrote me back, "You have to win," and then proceeded to write out in detail the reasons why it was so important to him. Well, we didn't win, and disappointment doesn't begin to describe how that feels. Disappointment for people who needed change, such as that young man. Disappointment for what this may mean for our province. Disappointment for so many who put their heart and their soul into our campaign. Since May 14th, I've taken some time to reflect and to consult with my colleagues. I've spoken to most of our candidates and to many others. Here are my thoughts. As leader of the BC NDP, I take full responsibility for this defeat. Clearly, our campaign was not good enough. We did not do a good job prosecuting the case against the government based on their record. And we did not make a clear enough case to British Columbians about what the consequences would be of re-electing the Liberals. I don't believe last week's results are at the end of positive politics in BC. The answer to the Liberals' populist right-wing playbook is not to simply adopt it, but voters expect opposition leaders in particular to hold sitting premiers accountable for their records. You have to define the problem before you can persuade people of the solution. I should have done a much better job of this than I did during the campaign. Secondly, we did not communicate our platform effectively enough to voters. Our party offered a substantive, fully costed platform that offered real solutions to real problems faced by British Columbians. I called this the hard road to victory, and I still believe politicians owe it to voters to tell them honestly what they propose to do if elected. We committed to a modest and focused agenda, but we put out detailed proposals in considerable volume and length in a way that didn't resonate with enough voters. We therefore failed to demonstrate a clear choice between our vision for the economy, the environment, and a more caring society, and Premier Clark, her record, her plan, and her team. Finally, my announcement about our position on the Kinder Morgan pipeline on Earth Day hurt our campaign. The way I raised it raised a number of process issues that stuck with us. I hold to the policy I set out with respect to this pipeline, but plainly, I didn't handle the issue very well. On all these points and others, I take full responsibility. No ifs, ands, or buts. So what do we do now? First, we will undertake a comprehensive review of this election to learn and act on the painful lessons it has taught us. I can assure you this review will spare nothing and no one, least of all me. This will not be a simple internal review. It must give voice to party members and listen to those from outside our ranks. It must address the strategy and tactics we employed in the election, and it must examine the fundamental questions of who we are as a party and our relationship with the people of BC. We therefore need to take an unflinching look at our strengths and weaknesses and what we need to do to improve. Successful political parties constantly evolve to meet the challenges they face, and that's what we must do. Second, we will prepare for the upcoming legislative session, and we will do the job we were elected to do. The NDP caucus is a strong, experienced team with some dynamic new members. We will hold the government to account. The Liberals committed in this election to balanced budgets, to lower public debt, to high levels of job creation, and to protecting services, in particular healthcare and education, and supports for seniors and children. That's the contract they signed with British Columbians on Election Day, and that's the contract they must honor. We will hold them to it with passion. British Columbians will hold them to it. I will stay on as leader to ensure that our obligation to our members and the public are met over the next few months, that our review of what went wrong in the election ensures that lessons are learned, that the official opposition does the job that hundreds of thousands of British Columbians elected us to do, and that we are organized to hold the government to account. There are some important meetings ahead for our party, caucus meetings, a provincial council meeting, and a party convention in November that must craft the blueprint for renewal. As for the long term, the caucus, the party executive, and members of the NDP must start immediately to map out how we win the next election. I will do whatever is required to see that this happens. I will be guided by the discussion and direction given. I'll put the public interest and the long-term success of the BC NDP ahead of any personal ambitions. For now, together, we must fight for shared prosperity, to reduce inequality, for jobs and a safe environment. Working closely and in concert with our entire team, I will do just that. I will do what is right for that young, hearing-impaired young man and the thousands like him who are counting on us. Lastly, I want to say a few words of thanks to the candidates who put their heart and soul into the election campaign, to all the party members and volunteers who worked so hard and gave up so much on the campaign, whether for an individual candidate or for the campaign as a whole, and to every one of the hundreds of thousands of British Columbians who voted for us. We will carry on. We will learn and get better, and we will succeed next time. Thank you. Hi, Jazz.
Two questions. Number one, if the review finds that the failings were your decisions, will you resign, number one? And number two, in regards to the Kinder Morgan decision, was there pressure from your caucus to come out that day and to make that announcement?
Look,
Is that here? Something to cast your announcement regarding the Kinder Morgan pipeline as a sort of populated loss. Can you respond to that, and also just as part of that, explain how you go from insisting that we must hold off judgment on the pipeline and you are the judge, and several weeks later announcing it. So was this a sort of a calculated political move?
Actually, quite the contrary. If you'll recall, the period before that time, I think we were doing very well, and I don't believe, in a general sense, that those kind of policy decisions have that kind of electoral effect. My view about that, and my view is, that it was important to be clear before the election that this is going to be a very divisive process that goes forward in this community and in British Columbia with respect to Kinder Morgan, just as it has been with Enbridge Northern Gateway. And we haven't even got to the end of that process and where we might take it from there. And so I think that division based on one application itself will be a negative factor for the BC economy over the next number of years. So I was looking to the long term in making that decision, the long-term interests of BC. I think it's fair to say the challenge in politics is, if you're going to make a substantive policy decision, to have a debate about the policy and not about the process. And clearly what happened, and I bear the responsibility for this, is it became a discussion of the process. And that's my responsibility. Hi, Marcella.
What do you say to the people like Adrian who said taking the high road wasn't the right road, that you should have fought fire with fire?
I think a couple of things that were unusual about the election campaign that we have to reflect on. One is the extent to which public opinion polls, which I was highly suspicious of throughout, and everybody in the media and everyone else who talked to me about them knows that was the case, knows that I'd never saw us winning by more than 5 or 6 points, whatever those polls were. But they created, I think, a little bit in the campaign, the sense that we were the government and the Liberals were the opposition. This is what happened in the campaign. and we didn't prosecute the case well enough. I don't think that there's anything wrong with holding the government accountable. I mean, that's what I've done in my career as MLA. That's the success I've had, and that's what we did in the period when I was leader of the NDP going into the election. We united and we held the government to account. We forced them back on the HST and all those other things, right? So but I do think that for the NDP in the long run, and I felt that we needed to expand the number of people participating in the election, that at a 50% turnout, that it would have been more difficult to win. Now, this is a little bit technical, but if you ask people in a public opinion survey, as many people did, are they going to vote? 80% of people generally in those surveys will say, we're going to vote. And they intend to. It's just that doesn't always happen on election day. So the challenge in public opinion surveys is, if you're trying to predict the outcome, of course, is to predict what the shape of the electorate would be. I felt that a more positive approach, not calling people down, not attacking them personally, would draw people into the political process who didn't like the personal and nasty nature of politics. Now, some might argue that that was unilateral and that happened anyway, including months of Liberal ads against me. But that's the reality. I made the judgment that we needed to expand the electorate. And one way to do that was to be not uncritical, because we're very critical of the government, and we will be in the days and months and years to follow, but that we be more positive and less personal. And people can judge on that, but I think that we needed to do a better job in holding them to account and reminding people of what the consequences would be of 4 more years of Liberal rule, and we didn't do that effectively. Always, Ian. That's okay. 2 questions is good. Okay.
Do you think leadership teams or trying to do the leadership question is how important to target this time? And also to go back to my colleague Rob's question, because there's some ambiguity here. Do you want to lead the Democrats in 2017?
First of all, I think that we elected a very strong team. We need stability right now. We need to focus on these 2 goals. One is accountability and learning lessons, and that needs to happen to be successful next time. And I don't think we've done that job well enough in previous elections, and we have to do it this time. And I'm committed to seeing that happen, regardless of what those conclusions would be, first of all. Secondly, I think it's vitally important for the people of BC that the government be held accountable, especially right now, in light of the election result and in light of their specific commitments to British Columbians. And we'll be holding them to account for those commitments. And doing that, I think, is essential to our long-term success. I was re-elected as the MLA for Vancouver Kingsway, and I'm going to do everything I can to see us win the 2017 election. Right? But here's my point. It's not simply what I want. Right? It is the case that leaders have lost elections in the past and come back and won the next election. It's not simply what I want. It's what the party wants. It's what the caucus wants. I am their servant in this matter, and I'm going to do everything I can in the coming days and months and years to see that we win the next election. And that's my commitment to people. It's to put the party and the people of BC first, the people that I've always represented with fire and passion, and that I intend to do as much in this session of Parliament as in any other session of Parliament I've been involved in. En français, bien sûr. Oui, oui. Ouais. Ouais. Écoutez, je pense depuis 2 ans, on a fait un bon travail à l'Assemblée législative en assurant que le gouvernement a dû répondre aux questions nécessaires. Et on va continuer, bien entendu, à suivre ce chemin. Je pense que ça c'est essentiel, ça c'est important pour l'avenir. Donc on va être bien entendu agressif sur des questions de fond. Je pense qu'il y a une nécessité d'être plus généreuse en politique. Je le crois, je l'ai toujours cru. Mais sur la question de la responsabilité du gouvernement, on va être plein au travail. On va, je pense, démontrer si le gouvernement ne prend pas ses responsabilités où le gouvernement a raté le coup. Et je pense qu'on va faire ce travail d'une manière agressive, dynamique et vigoureuse. Hi.
It was a one-note campaign that gone on with a very simple message that she's good for the economy, you're bad for the economy. It was a campaign filled with misleading information about what our government has done, will do, what you did. How can you counter that? What should you have done differently?
Well, I think I spoke to that. I think clearly we needed to do a more comprehensive job of holding them to account. I think part of the challenge of doing that in the election campaign was the sense that the Liberal Party was so far behind for a time, a sense that I didn't agree with, but which was generally felt, I think, in the media and other places. And that's not their fault. That was just what was felt. But clearly, we needed to do a better job in the election campaign. Remember, what had happened is for 2 years, the government had essentially failed on its main agenda items. And I think sometimes it's a mistake to assume that people are focused on that throughout that period. We need to make sure when the focus was on the election and voting that they also did that, and we didn't do that enough. And that's clear from the campaign. And so they did run a particularly negative election campaign based on those specific promises they made. They said they'd balance the budget. They said they would not. In fact, they talked about enhancing healthcare services. They talked about ensuring and protecting education services. They said they would enhance children's services. They said they would protect the vulnerable. Well, we're going to hold them to account for that over the next 4 years, absolutely. And I think people will see soon enough that the Liberal Party's many pre-election commitments with respect to BC Hydro, with respect to the economy, with respect to healthcare and education, don't meet the test.
But isn't the lesson, though, that comprehensive doesn't work, that simple works?
I
She just kept repeating, and she won.
But I think that it's if I might pick up the word simple, I think that's too simplistic. I think you do have to get a mandate to govern, and I think you'll see that difficulty that the present government has as it goes forward. I mean, in our case, one of the challenges, and it was one of the challenges, let's face it, of the Kinder Morgan decision, is that we primarily focused in the campaign on the economy, on issues of skills training and forestry and mining and other issues that were directly related to economic growth and promoting economic growth. That was a focus for us in the campaign. Even those decisions around pipelines, I'd argue, because I think those particular applications are a distraction in British Columbia when we need to focus on job creation, or we're part of that. So I think you do have to put forward a serious agenda, but you have to communicate it more effectively, clearly than we did. And that's a challenge for election campaigns. It's a challenge for everyone, you know. I mean, I think there's a fairly large 759 club, you know, out there that thought we'd done enough a minute before the polls closed, right? And I'm not even going to suggest any of them are working for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer now. But you know, the fact is, people thought we'd done enough, and we didn't. And that's not anyone's responsibility. That's not the media's responsibility. That's not anyone else. That's my responsibility.
Mr. Dix,
Yes.
you mentioned a comprehensive review is going to be in place.
Yes.
So would you rule out, there are two parts of my question. First, would you rule out resigning should the report directly hold you responsible for this case? And secondly, is the failure to capitalize the ethnic votes one of the reasons behind NDP?
I think it's a complicated question. You know, in Vancouver Kingsway, which is the most diverse riding in all of BC, we did very well. Obviously, our vote went up. My personal vote went up. And we did extremely well in all of the communities that make up Vancouver Kingsway, in particular the Chinese-Canadian community. I think it's fair to say that the Liberals ran a very aggressive and negative campaign in the media, in the Chinese-Canadian community. But it's also fair to say that in some of our most diverse communities, which include Vancouver and Burnaby, the NDP vote went up. I think the key thing to remember about the election is on the substance of it. Clearly, the Liberals communicated a strong message about their view on jobs. And in those ridings, ironically, where we communicated our own strong message of jobs, particularly in the film and television industry, in ridings such as Point Grey and Fairview, and even ridings we lost such as Langara and others, we went up. And but we didn't obviously do that generally. But that was that economic argument that we had for jobs didn't resonate throughout the whole province. But I think that that clearly is something we need to continue to review. We have a more and more diverse society. It's part of my daily life as an MLA to represent a diverse and dynamic community, and we need to do a better job in that regard. Yes, because I think overall turnout will rise in diverse communities, and we need to do a better job getting a strong share of that and seeing that reflected in our candidates, in our party, and in our approach to politics.
Cassidy is next, over here.
Adrian, do you feel like you do have to support your caucus right now as party members, or do you feel the pressure to
Look, this was an impossibly disappointing result. I mean, in that sense, it was very different, and is very different from 2009, for example. In 2009, we started the campaign ourselves, 18 points down, and we almost won. We lost by 3.6%. But on election night, I think it's fair to say most of us going into election night didn't think we were going to win in 2009. I think most of us thought that we would be able to win in 2013, and that makes the result more difficult. But look, our job right now, and my job right now, is to focus very plainly on what we need to do, which is to hold the government very strongly to account on all these key issues, on the key economic issues, on healthcare and education, on the environment. These are critical issues for the future of BC. We received and will receive, I think, once all the votes were counted, about 40% of the vote, and 33 or maybe just over 33 seats. And so we have an important responsibility to represent the people who voted for us and all the people of BC. And that's what we're going to do now. And that's what our caucus team has to do now. And we have to learn the lessons of what was a particularly problematic and devastating defeat on election night.
Last question in English and one in French, that's it.
Yeah, Mr. Dix, before election, the Christie Caucus very clearly promised to apologize to Chinese people. And a lot of people say the Chinese vote, especially, as you say, in Kingsway, is very important factor.
Yep.
Did you clearly promise the Chinese government to apologize? I remember you didn't do that. So that's why some people say maybe it's the major factor you lose.
Well, first of all, I don't believe it was a major factor that we lost. In 1992, the NDP legislature passed a motion saying that the federal government should apologize for the Chinese head tax. That was 21 years ago, right? In May of 2012, the Liberal Party sent us a motion of apology that would have passed the legislature in May 2012. The Liberal Party, and on its own, decided to withdraw that motion. Presumably, now that we've learned, because they wanted to do it at a time more electorally positive for them, which I think is, well, people will judge, but I don't think that's very positive behavior on the part of a government. So I absolutely think that an apology is appropriate, not just for the head tax, which is discussion, but also for the legislation in 1907 that took away the right to go to school for many Chinese Canadians and Japanese Canadians and others, right? For federal law, immigration laws that were clearly racist. I think that's absolutely appropriate. And had the Liberals proceeded in May 2012, remember what happened in May 2012. There was a motion from the government with respect to an apology on the Japanese internment. That day, Naomi Yamamoto, then the Minister of Advanced Education, got up and presented that motion. And I spoke in favor of it in the legislature. She had a reception afterwards. I went to her office and supported her, right? And so had the Liberals presented that motion on the head tax, I would have done exactly the same thing. In fact, I had prepared a speech to do just that. So, I understand that the Liberal Party sees these as political issues, but I don't. I think that an apology is warranted and would support any that came forward.
Last question in French.
Monsieur Dix, bonjour.
Bonjour.
J'aimerais savoir deux petites questions.
Deux.
Si vous avez à refaire,
Tout comme Ian Bailey, hein? C'est comme ça.
si vous aviez à refaire l'annonce Kinder Morgan aujourd'hui, comment la feriez-vous? Deuxième, vous sentez-vous, après cette déception, personnellement capable de mener la campagne en 2017?
Écoutez, premièrement, je pense que cette élection, c'est bien entendu une déception pour nous, pour moi personnellement. Il y a beaucoup de choses, un tas de choses qu'on voulait faire pour améliorer la situation en Colombie-Britannique. Hein? Donc, c'est une grosse déception. C'est le moins que l'on puisse dire. Hein? Donc, mais je suis plein de détermination de faire notre travail comme un parti d'opposition, de préparer les prochaines échéances, de prendre mes responsabilités, et je vais le faire. J'ai pleinement l'intention de le faire. On va travailler et je vais travailler avec toutes mes forces, quoi que soit la situation personnelle. Donc ça, c'est, à mon sens, clair. Et donc, on va continuer, bien entendu, à suivre ce chemin. Et on va travailler avec mes collègues. C'est pas seulement à moi, n'est-ce pas? Ce sont des décisions du parti, ce sont des décisions des militants du parti, ce sont des décisions, en fait, de mes confrères et mes consorts dans le caucus néo-démocrate. Et je vais continuer à faire mon travail. Thank you.